"No, don't look there," said the Apache woman. The rancher stared and froze in horror. The sun was low in the sky, casting long shadows across the desert. Thomas, a middle-aged rancher with years of experience guiding cattle across the open lands, rode slowly along a dusty trail. He had been working the same stretch of Arizona desert for decades, and most days passed quietly, with only the wind and the occasional hawk for company. But today, something felt different. The air was heavy, and the usual calm of the desert seemed replaced by an almost eerie silence. Even the coyotes, who normally called to each other in the distance, were quiet. Thomas adjusted the brim of his hat, wiping the sweat from his brow. He had been out since early morning, checking water sources and making sure his fences were secure. His horse, a sturdy bay named Shadow, moved steadily. But even Shadow seemed uneasy, shifting nervously and snorting at the empty distance ahead. Thomas tried to shake off the feeling. He had seen many strange things in the desert over the years. Unexpected storms, wildfires, and even rattlesnakes crossing the trails, but this sensation was different. It was as if the land itself was warning him. As he rounded a bend in the trail, Thomas noticed a figure standing near a cluster of rocks ahead. At first he thought it was another rancher, or perhaps a traveler lost on the desert road. But as he drew closer, he realized it was a woman, alone, with long dark hair flowing in the slight wind. She was dressed in simple clothing that suggested she was Apache, her posture tense and watchful. Her eyes, dark and sharp, were fixed directly on him, and Thomas felt a sudden chill run down his spine. The woman did not speak at first. She just stared, her hands gripping something close to her chest. Thomas slowed Shadow, unsure if he should approach or turn back. He had heard stories about people wandering in the desert, but he had never met anyone quite like her. There was a quiet strength about her, a presence that seemed both fragile and unbreakable at the same time. Breath. Finally she spoke, her voice low and urgent. "No, don't look there," she said, pointing toward the edge of the canyon nearby. Thomas squinted, trying to see what she meant. The canyon stretched wide and deep, the rocky walls jagged and unforgiving. From this distance it looked empty, but there was something in her tone that made him hesitate. Her warning was not casual. It carried fear, and perhaps even desperation. Thomas, curious despite himself, leaned forward in the saddle. "What is it? What should I not look at?" he asked. The woman shook her head quickly, her eyes wide.
"It is not safe," she replied. "You must not look."
"Turn your eyes away, please." Breath. For a moment Thomas wanted to obey. Something about the way she spoke, the intensity in her gaze, made him uneasy. But human nature being what it is, curiosity tugged at him. Slowly, almost unwillingly, he shifted in his saddle and glanced toward the canyon. The sight he saw made him freeze in a way he had never experienced before. The canyon floor, hidden mostly by shadow and distance, was littered with signs of chaos, breaths. Rocks were scattered in odd patterns, and the faint traces of movement, footprints, dragged shapes, were visible even from afar. But it was the figures, or what appeared to be figures, that held his gaze. They were partially obscured by shadows, yet their stillness and the strange way the light fell across them made Thomas's heart pound. He realized immediately that this was no ordinary scene. Something terrible had happened here, something that was not meant to be seen by outsiders. The woman moved closer to him, her hands gripping the reins of Shadow as though to steady herself. "I warned you," she whispered, her voice trembling. Breaths. "Some things are not meant to be seen. It will haunt you if you look." Thomas's mind raced. By detail raced. He had dealt with danger before, storms, wild animals, and the harshness of the desert. But this was different. He felt a deep, unsettling chill that had nothing to do with the wind. He could sense the weight of history, of pain and loss, embedded in the land before him. His instinct was to look away, to respect the woman's warning, but his eyes were glued to the scene. For several long minutes, neither spoke. The only sounds were the distant calls of birds and the soft creak of the saddle as Thomas shifted uneasily. The woman's expression was unreadable. Fear, grief, and determination all mingled on her face. She seemed caught between a need to protect Thomas and a need to confront whatever had happened in the canyon herself. Finally, Thomas shook himself out of his stunned silence. Breath. "What happened here?" he asked, his voice barely more than a whisper. The woman hesitated, looking down at the rocky ground as if gathering strength. "Long ago," she began slowly, "this place was sacred. It was protected by my people. But outsiders came, and they did not understand. They brought destruction. They brought pain." Her voice cracked slightly, and she swallowed hard.
"I have seen it before. I could not stop it, but perhaps now you can help."
Thomas felt a mixture of awe and fear. He had always respected the land and the people who lived close to it, but this was beyond anything he had encountered. He realized that the woman's warning was not just about what he could see, but about what he could feel. The weight of loss, the echoes of suffering embedded in the rocks and sand. He nodded slowly, understanding that he had been given a choice: to turn away and remain safe, or to follow the woman and face the truth. Despite his fear, something inside him compelled him to stay. He had always been a man who faced challenges head-on, whether it was rescuing lost cattle or navigating treacherous terrain. This was different, yes, but it was still a challenge that required courage. The woman watched him carefully, her eyes searching his face for signs of hesitation. When she saw his resolve, she gave a small nod, as if confirming that he could be trusted. Break. Together they moved closer to the edge of the canyon, though Thomas kept his gaze averted as much as he could. The wind whispered across the rocks, carrying with it the scent of sagebrush and something older, something that felt almost like memory itself. Basque. As they walked, the woman spoke of the land, its history, its beauty, and its dangers. She told stories of her ancestors, of the lessons passed down through generations, of the respect owed to the earth and to the spirits that inhabited it. Thomas listened intently, absorbing every word. He realized that this journey was not just about discovering a scene of horror. It was about understanding the land, its people, and the responsibilities that came with walking across it. Hours seemed to pass in silence, broken only by the occasional word or the soft crunch of boots on rock. The sun continued its slow descent, painting the canyon walls with colors that were both beautiful and haunting. Thomas felt a mix of fear and wonder. He had never experienced anything like this. The way the desert seemed alive, aware of their presence, watching them as they moved carefully through its depths. Finally, as the sky turned shades of orange and purple, the woman stopped and turned to face him. Her eyes were filled with a mixture of relief and sorrow. "We must rest here," she said softly. "The night will make the canyon different."
Shadows will move in ways that are not safe for those unprepared. Tomorrow you will see
more than you can imagine. Thomas nodded, understanding that the first step of this journey was complete, but that the real challenge lay ahead. He felt a strange bond forming with the woman, a connection born of shared respect, fear, and determination. In that moment he realized that he had crossed a threshold, leaving behind the familiar world of ranches and trails, stepping into a place where history, mystery, and danger intertwined. But as night fell over the desert, Thomas sat beside the woman, staring at the flickering campfire. The canyon loomed in the distance, dark and silent, holding secrets that would not easily reveal themselves. Thomas knew he would never forget this moment, the warning he had ignored, and the courage it would take to face what lay ahead. He also knew that the desert had chosen him, in its own way, to witness a story that had been waiting a long time to be told. The stars appeared one by one, sparkling above the vast expanse of land. Thomas thought of his life back on the ranch, of the safety and routine he had always known. That world felt distant now, replaced by something larger and more powerful. He realized that courage was not just about facing the obvious dangers, but about facing the unknown, about trusting those who understood it, and about stepping forward even when fear tried to hold him back. As he lay down to rest, the sound of the wind and the faint cries of distant wildlife filled the air. Thomas's mind was restless, turning over what he had seen and what was yet to come. Somewhere in the shadows, the woman kept watch, guarding the secrets of the canyon, and in that moment, he felt both awe and gratitude. He had been given a glimpse into a world few outsiders would ever know, and the story was just beginning. The first light of dawn painted the canyon in soft golds and pinks, and Thomas stirred awake, feeling the cool desert breeze against his face. A fire from the previous night had burned low, leaving only a few glowing embers. He rubbed his eyes, remembering the strange and frightening sight from yesterday, the scene that the Apache woman had warned him not to look at. Brass. Even now, thinking about it sent a shiver down his spine. He had spent much of his life working the land, facing storms, wild animals, and rough terrain, but this felt different. This was a kind of danger he could not fight with brute strength or experience. The woman was already awake, sitting quietly a few steps away, her gaze distant as if she were speaking with someone only she could see. Her presence was calm yet commanding, and Thomas realized that she carried something heavier than fear. It was responsibility, a duty to protect a story, a place, and perhaps even lives. She turned her head slightly, and Thomas could see her dark eyes fixed on him. "Are you ready?" she asked softly. Narration. Her voice was gentle, yet there was an edge of urgency. Thomas nodded.
"I think I have to be," he said, trying to steady his voice. "I need to understand."
"You must understand that what you saw yesterday is only a shadow of the truth. The canyon has held many secrets, some older than anyone alive today." Band. To know the truth is to bear a heavy weight. As they walked toward the edge of the canyon, the woman began to share her story. Her name was Nayeli, and she came from a long line of Apache guardians. Her ancestors had been stewards of the land for generations, keeping it safe from outsiders who would not respect its power and its history. Thomas listened intently, fascinated. He had heard tales of the Apache people growing up, but hearing it directly from someone who had lived it made the stories real in a way that books and movies never could. "This canyon was sacred," Nayeli explained, pointing to the rocks and crevices that lined the canyon floor.
Long before anyone came to this land, my people lived here. We learned to read the land, to understand its signs, and to protect what was important."
But over the years, things changed. People came who did not understand. Breaths. They saw only what they wanted. They dug, they built, they took, and the canyon suffered. Breath. Thomas glanced down at the rocky slopes below. He tried to picture the land as it had once been, untouched, alive with the sounds of animals, the wind, and the voices of those who had lived there before him. Breaths. Now it was quiet, almost too quiet, as though it held its breath, waiting for him to learn its lessons. Nayeli continued, "When I was a child, my father taught me the ways of the land. He showed me how to listen to the wind, to understand the patterns of the birds, and to respect the spirits of the canyon. He said that every rock and every tree has a story.
Some stories are joyful, others are painful. The canyon holds both. Thomas felt a deep respect for her words. He had spent his life managing land for practical reasons, fences, water, crops, but he had never thought about the history embedded in every stone, every path, every small creature. This canyon was not just a piece of land. It was a living record of generations, of struggles, victories, and losses. As they moved closer to the area she had warned him about, Nayeli slowed her pace. Her eyes scanned the rocks and shadows carefully, and Thomas noticed a subtle tension in her shoulders. "We must be careful," she said. The canyon is not only sacred, but it is also dangerous, in ways you cannot see. It tests those who enter it, even without knowing. Brave. Thomas followed closely, trying to match her steps. He had always considered himself brave, but as he walked along the uneven rocks, with the wind whistling and the shadows shifting in strange ways, he felt something he had never felt before. Humility. There was a power here, a quiet authority that reminded him that no human, no matter how experienced, could truly dominate the land. They stopped at a small ledge overlooking the canyon floor. Phew! Nayeli motioned for Thomas to look, but he hesitated, remembering her warning. He could only see shadows and shapes, but it was enough. The canyon was littered with the remnants of what had been disturbed. Rocks moved, earth shifted, and faint markings in the sand hinted at events that had not been natural. Thomas's heart pounded, and he could feel the weight of history pressing down on him. "Many years ago," Nayeli began, "outsiders came seeking gold, water, and land. They did not care for what was sacred. They disrupted the canyon and some people were hurt. I witnessed it as a child." "I could do nothing then, but I have carried the memory of it ever since." Thomas was silent, trying to absorb her words. First, he had seen disasters and accidents before, but hearing it framed like this, through the eyes of someone who had lived it, made it much more personal. He could feel the sorrow in her voice, the burden she carried for the mistakes of others. It was a heavy responsibility, one he could scarcely imagine.
Nayeli continued, explaining how the canyon had survived despite the challenges.
She spoke of her family's efforts to protect it, teaching younger generations about respect, history, and vigilance. She explained that the land had its own way of testing people, sometimes through natural dangers, sometimes by revealing truths that were difficult to face. Thomas realized that what he had glimpsed the day before was only part of the story. The real danger was not just what was visible, but what had been hidden, what had been forgotten, and what had been ignored. Nayeli's warning was not only about protecting him physically, but about protecting him from the weight of knowledge that came with seeing too much too soon. Hours passed as they walked through the canyon together. Nayeli pointed out different formations, each with its own story. She showed Thomas the remnants of ancient shelters, water paths carved over centuries, and markings on stones that told stories of generations long gone. Thomas was amazed at how much history could be read from the land itself if one knew how to look.
As they stopped to rest near a small stream, Thomas asked Nayeli how she managed to bear such a heavy burden. "It is not easy," she admitted.
Sometimes the weight of the past feels unbearable, but I remind myself that I am not just carrying the stories of my family. I am carrying the stories of the land, and I am not alone. Those who understand can help if they are willing. Thomas nodded, feeling a connection not only to Nayeli, but also to the land itself. He realized that courage was more than facing physical danger. It was also facing the truth, no matter how painful, and respecting the responsibilities that came with that knowledge. As the sun climbed higher in the sky, Nayeli led Thomas to a deeper part of the canyon. The rocks here were taller, the shadows darker,
and the air cooler. It was a place that seemed untouched by time, yet it carried a heavy sense of memory. "This is where the events of long ago left their mark," she said. "And this is why I warned you."
It is not only dangerous for your body, but also for your heart and mind, the canyon remembers.
Thomas swallowed hard. He had always considered himself strong, both physically and mentally, but he felt the weight of her words pressing on him. He realized that what lay ahead would require more than courage. It would require respect, understanding, and patience. For the rest of the day, they moved carefully through the canyon, but Nayeli continued to share stories, teaching Thomas how to read the land, how to listen to the subtle signs, and how to recognize the patterns left by generations before them. Thomas was grateful for her guidance, but each story, each lesson, added layers of meaning to the land he thought he understood. By evening, they had reached a place where the canyon widened, and Thomas could see traces of the past more clearly: broken rocks, faint pathways, and remnants of human activity were scattered across the ground. Nayeli stood quietly, her eyes scanning the area with a mix of sorrow and determination. "Breaths. Tomorrow," she said, "you will see more. But tonight, you must rest. The canyon is patient, and it tests those who enter it slowly. If we try to rush, we may miss the truth." Bah! As they set up a small camp, Thomas thought about the journey so far. He had come seeking understanding, but he had also found humility and respect for a land that was far older and wiser than he was. He realized that the canyon held lessons not just for him, but for anyone willing to listen. As the fire crackled and the stars appeared in the sky, Thomas felt a quiet anticipation. The events of the past day had opened a door to a world he had never known, a world filled with history, mystery, and the quiet strength of those who protected it. He knew that tomorrow would bring more revelations, and he resolved to face them with courage, respect, and an open heart. The night settled over the canyon, and Thomas drifted into a restless sleep, the weight of the land and its stories pressing gently upon him. Nayeli remained watchful, her presence a steady reminder that the canyon's secrets were not to be taken lightly. And somewhere in the quiet, the desert seemed to whisper, carrying with it the echoes of the past, waiting for those who were ready to listen. Morning came slowly in the canyon. The sunlight crept over the jagged rocks, painting the walls with soft golden light. Thomas stirred awake, feeling both anxious and curious. Last night had been quiet, but he could still sense the weight of the canyon pressing down on him. He had learned much from Nayeli, the Apache woman, about the land and its history, but he knew that the real truth, the heart of the canyon story, was still ahead. Nayeli was already awake, sitting beside the small fire they had kept alive through the night. Her eyes were sharp, scanning the canyon as though it spoke to her in whispers only she could hear. She motioned for Thomas to approach. "Today," she said softly, "you will see more than shadows." "You will see what has been hidden, and it will test you."
Thomas nodded, feeling a mixture of fear and determination.
He had never been a man to shy away from challenges, but he could not deny that this felt different. This was not just physical danger. It was the kind of danger that tested the heart and the mind. He knew that to understand the canyon fully, he would need courage, patience, and respect. They began their journey deeper into the canyon. The path was narrow and rocky, winding between high cliffs and steep drop-offs. Thomas followed carefully, keeping close to Nayeli. Every so often she would pause and point to markings on the stones, small signs that would go unnoticed by anyone unfamiliar with the land. She explained how these markings were left by her ancestors, a language of the canyon itself, telling stories of people who had lived there long ago. Thomas listened intently. He had never realized how much could be read from the land if one knew what to look for. Every rock, every tree, every trail seemed to have a story. He felt humbled by the depth of knowledge Nayeli carried, and by the way she respected the canyon and its history. As they moved further, the canyon walls grew higher and the shadows deeper. The sunlight barely reached the canyon floor, in some areas making it feel cooler and more mysterious. Thomas could feel the tension in the air, a quiet energy that seemed to watch them as they walked. He had faced wild animals, storms, and accidents in his life, but this felt different. The canyon itself seemed alive, aware of their presence, and aware of the secrets it held.
Pressed. Nayeli stopped suddenly near a cluster of rocks. "Here," she said, her voice barely above a whisper.
"Look carefully. This place has been disturbed, but not by nature. Something happened here a long time ago and it left its mark." Thomas crouched down to examine the ground. He saw the faint outlines of what looked like pathways, worn by movement but disrupted in strange ways. Rocks had been shifted, some larger stones broken apart. It was clear that this area had not been untouched, and yet it was difficult to understand exactly what had occurred. Nayeli's eyes were distant as she spoke.
These were the actions of people who did not understand. They came to take, to dig, to explore without knowing the importance of this land.
Breaths. Some were careless, and some were cruel. I have seen the result of such actions before, and I carry that memory with me. Perhaps. Thomas felt a chill run down his spine. He had been prepared for physical danger, but he was not prepared for the emotional weight of this place. He could sense the sorrow and the anger embedded in the rocks, as though the canyon itself remembered the pain of the past. He realized that the woman's warning yesterday had been about more than just what he might see. It was about the feelings that came with seeing it. They continued their walk, moving carefully along the uneven terrain. Nayeli pointed out more signs of the past, small carvings on rocks, places where water had been diverted, and even remnants of ancient shelters. Thomas was amazed at how much history could be read from these details if one knew how to observe. Nayeli explained that her ancestors had left these markings to protect the land and to guide those who came after them. Hours passed, and the sun climbed higher. The canyon seemed endless, each twist and turn revealing new details, new stories. Thomas was beginning to understand why Nayeli had chosen to protect this place so fiercely. It was not just land, it was a living memory, a record of generations, of people who had loved it, fought for it, and suffered within it. As they stopped near a natural spring, Thomas noticed something unusual. The water, though clear, reflected shadows that did not match the rocks around it. Nayeli saw him glance at it and nodded.
"The canyon holds reflections of the past," she said. "Sometimes you may see what was once here, even if it is no longer present. It is a reminder that time moves differently here, that the land remembers."
Thomas was silent, trying to comprehend her words. He had always believed that time was a constant, moving forward in a straight line. But standing here, resounded by rocks, water, and shadows that seemed alive, he began to understand that history lingered in the land itself. The canyon had its own memory, and it was patient, waiting for those willing to see and listen. They moved on, and the canyon walls began to narrow again. The sunlight barely touched the ground, creating deep shadows that seemed to shift as they walked. Thomas could feel his heart racing, a mix of fear and anticipation. He knew that they were approaching the area Nayeli had warned him about, the place where the canyon's story was most powerful. Urge. Nayeli paused and turned to him.
"You must be careful here," she said.
The canyon tests those who enter it. Some people cannot bear to see the truth, and they leave with their hearts heavy. But you must be ready to face what you will find. Thomas nodded, taking a deep breath. He had faced many challenges in his life, but this was unlike anything he had encountered. This was not about strength or skill. It was about courage, understanding, and respect. He realized that he had to trust Nayeli completely, and trust the canyon itself if he hoped to learn its secrets. They descended into a narrow gorge, the walls close on either side. The air was cooler here, and the sound of water dripping echoed softly. Thomas noticed strange patterns in the rocks, small piles of stones, worn paths and markings that seemed almost like messages. Nayeli explained that these were reminders left by her ancestors to guide and protect those who respected the land.
As they moved deeper, Thomas began to sense something more.
The canyon seemed to pulse with energy, as though it was alive. He could feel the weight of generations pressing down on him, the memories of people long gone. It was both humbling and terrifying. He realized that the canyon was more than just a place. It was a teacher, and he was here to learn its lessons. Breath. Finally, they reached a wide plateau within the canyon. From here, Thomas could see evidence of the events Nayeli had described: the disrupted rocks, the faint traces of movement, and the subtle signs of human interference. It was a sobering sight, but it also carried a strange beauty. The canyon had endured, and it had preserved its story for those willing to see. Nayeli turned to him, her eyes filled with a mix of sadness and determination. "This is the heart of the canyon," she said. "Averages to the Arab and Egypt seas are now up over sight. It is where the past meets the present, where the land remembers what has happened. It is not easy to see, but it is important. You must understand, respect, and remember." Thomas felt a deep sense of responsibility. He realized that he was no longer just a visitor in the canyon. He was a witness. But he had been entrusted with its story, and with that trust came a duty to honor it. He knew that the journey ahead would reveal more, and that he would need every ounce of courage and understanding to face it. As the day drew to a close, Thomas and Nayeli set up camp on the plateau. The canyon stretched endlessly around them, its walls bathed in the warm glow of the setting sun. Thomas reflected on what he had learned so far: the history, the responsibility, and the power of the land. He knew that tomorrow would bring more discoveries, and that the true story of the canyon was only beginning to unfold. As night fell, Thomas lay beneath the stars, feeling the weight of the canyon's memory pressing gently on him. Nayeli remained watchful, a quiet guardian of the land and its secrets. And somewhere in the shadows, the canyon seemed to whisper, sharing its lessons with those who were ready to listen, testing their courage, and waiting for the story to be fully understood. The morning air in the canyon was crisp and cool, carrying the faint scent of sage and earth. Thomas woke with a sense of anticipation, mixed with unease. Grasp. After the journey so far, he knew that today would reveal much more about the canyon's secrets. Nayeli was already awake, kneeling near the fire with a quiet focus. Her eyes scanned the rocks and cliffs around them, alert to every sound and movement. "You are ready?" she asked, without looking up. Her voice was calm but carried the weight of authority. Thomas nodded. "I think I am," he replied, yet he felt a flutter of nervousness in his chest. He had seen traces of history and disturbance, but the heart of the canyon, the place where its story would reveal itself fully, still lay ahead. He had to be prepared, both mentally and emotionally, for what he might find. They began to descend a steep path, careful with every step. The canyon walls here were towering and jagged, the shadows deepening with each turn. Thomas noticed the subtle changes in the land. The rocks seemed more jagged, the trails more worn, and the wind carried a strange whisper as if the canyon itself were alive. Nayeli moved ahead with confident precision, her footsteps light but steady. Thomas followed closely, aware of every sound, every shadow, every movement of the air. Break. After a while, they reached a narrow section of the canyon, where the walls closed in and the sunlight barely reached the ground. Thomas paused, sensing an almost tangible tension in the air. He could feel the energy of the canyon intensifying, like a quiet warning. Nayeli noticed his hesitation and placed a gentle hand on his shoulder.
Breath. This is where the canyon's story is strongest, she said softly. The land remembers everything that has happened here.
What you will see is not only history, it is truth. And it is heavy. You must be ready to face it. Past. Thomas took a deep breath. He had faced many challenges in his life, but he understood now that this was not about physical strength.
Courage here meant understanding, respect, and the willingness to witness events that were difficult and painful. He nodded to Nayeli, signaling that he was ready to continue.
As they moved forward, the canyon opened into a wide area. From a distance it appeared calm and undisturbed, but Nayeli's careful observation revealed signs of past events. Rocks were shifted, small pathways disrupted, and faint traces of human presence could be seen. Thomas felt a chill as he realized that these traces were not recent. They belonged to a time long ago, yet they still carried the weight of memory. Nayeli led him to a place where the land seemed to hold the echoes of the past. Here the canyon floor was littered with broken rocks, worn stones, and unusual markings. Some of the stones were stacked in careful piles, while others seemed scattered in chaotic patterns.
Nayeli explained that these patterns were not random. They were remnants of human activity, traces of both carelessness and respect, of people who had understood the importance of the land and others who had ignored it. Thomas knelt to examine the markings.
He could see faint impressions in the dirt and subtle scratches on the rocks. They were evidence of events long past, yet they felt immediate, as though the canyon had preserved them intentionally for anyone who would witness and respect them. He felt a mixture of awe and sorrow. The place was beautiful, but it also carried the heavy memory of mistakes and losses.
Nayeli's voice broke the silence. Long ago, people came here without understanding.
Some were looking for riches, some for power, and some simply did not care. They disturbed the canyon, and lives were affected.
The land remembers their actions, both good and bad. That is why it tests those who enter. It shows the truth to those willing to see. Great.
Thomas felt the weight of her words. The canyon was not only a place. It was a living record of human behavior, a teacher, and a guardian. Every stone, every shadow, every pathway carried lessons for those who could observe carefully. He realized that he had been given a rare opportunity to learn from both the land and the woman who understood it so deeply. They continued to explore the plateau, moving carefully among the rocks. Nayeli pointed out areas where the land had been damaged and places where it had been preserved. She explained how her ancestors had worked to maintain the canyon, teaching younger generations to respect its power and its stories. Thomas listened intently, understanding that the work of protection was ongoing and required vigilance, patience, and care. As they approached a small cliff edge, Nayeli paused. Below them was a narrow gorge, partially hidden by shadows. Thomas could see the faint outline of rocks and paths, but it was difficult to make sense of it from above.
Grasp. Nayeli motioned for him to look closer.
This is the place, she said softly. And the
Desk. Here, the canyon's memory is strongest. It holds the truth of what has happened. You must see it with care, and you must carry it with respect. Thomas leaned forward slightly, his eyes tracing the shapes below. The canyon floor was more disturbed here than anywhere else. Rocks were shifted in ways that suggested struggle, and faint impressions in the dirt hinted at movement long past. He felt a pang of sorrow as he imagined the people who had been affected, the choices made without understanding, and the impact on the land itself.
Nayeli placed a hand on his arm.
Breaths. Remember, she said, the canyon shows you the truth, but it also tests your heart. You must feel it, but you must not be overwhelmed.
The land is patient, and it teaches those who listen. Thomas nodded, taking a deep breath.
He felt a deep connection to the land, to Nayeli, and to the history preserved in every rock and shadow.
He realized that the canyon was more than a place of beauty. It was a place of learning, reflection, and responsibility.
To truly understand it, he would need to carry its lessons with him, both here and in the world beyond. They descended carefully into the gorge, moving slowly to avoid disturbing the delicate balance of the land. As they walked, Nayeli continued to share stories of her ancestors, of people who had lived and worked in the canyon, and of the lessons they had left behind. Thomas felt a growing respect for the traditions and knowledge that had been passed down through generations, understanding that these teachings were vital to preserving the canyon's integrity. Finally, they reached the center of the gorge. Narration. Here, the land seemed to hum with energy, and the shadows shifted in ways that suggested movement beyond the physical fog. Braths could see the full extent of what Nayeli had described. The traces of human activity, the disruptions, and the careful markers left by those who had respected the land.
It was a sobering sight, but it also carried a sense of hope.
Despite the challenges and mistakes of the past, the canyon had endured. Nayeli turned to him, her eyes filled with a mixture of sorrow and determination. "This is the truth," she said. "It is not easy to see, but it must be understood. The canyon shows both the pain and the resilience. It teaches respect, patience, and responsibility."
That is why I brought you here.
Thomas felt a deep sense of responsibility settle over him. He realized that he had not only witnessed history, but he had also been entrusted with the task of remembering and honoring it. The canyon's story was now part of him, and he knew that he would carry its lessons with him for the rest of his life. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the gorge, Thomas and Nayeli set up a small camp. The canyon around them was quiet, but the energy of the land was palpable. Breaths. Thomas reflected on what he had seen, the traces of human presence, the care and disrespect shown over generations, and the enduring strength of the canyon itself. He understood that this place was more than a location. It was a living record, a teacher, and a guardian. That night, as Thomas lay under the stars, he thought about the journey ahead. The canyon had revealed much, but he knew there was still more to learn. Nayeli's presence, her guidance, and the land itself had opened his eyes to a deeper understanding of history, responsibility, and respect.
He realized that the true power of the canyon was not in what it could destroy, but in what it could teach those willing to listen.
As he drifted into sleep, Thomas felt the canyon's presence all around him, a quiet reminder that the journey was not over. The land had shared its truth, and now it awaited those who were ready to carry it forward with care, courage, and respect.
Brown in desperations, and he knew that he would face them with an open heart and a steady mind.
Morning broke gently over the canyon, the sun rising slowly behind the jagged cliffs, painting the rocks with shades of gold and orange.
Thomas woke with a deep sense of anticipation. Today would be the final part of his journey through this extraordinary place.
He felt a mixture of nervousness and readiness. After all that he had seen and learned, he knew that the canyon still had more to reveal, and that understanding it fully would require courage and patience. Nayeli was already awake, her eyes scanning the canyon with the quiet focus that had guided them through the past days. She seemed almost in conversation with the land, listening to its whispers and responding with calm attention. "Brasp, are you ready?" she asked softly.
There was no pressure in her tone, only a deep expectation of respect and attentiveness.
Thomas nodded. "Yes."
I am ready. He felt the words carry more weight than usual. This journey had taught him humility, patience, and the power of listening. Breaths. He realized that courage was not just facing danger. It was also accepting truth, even when it was difficult or painful. They began walking toward the deepest part of the canyon, where the land seemed to hold its oldest memories. The rocks here were taller, the shadows darker, and the air carried a quiet hum, as if the canyon itself were alive. Thomas noticed subtle markings in the stones and faint traces on the ground. Evidence of people who had come long before him. Naeli explained that these markings were messages and reminders, left to guide and teach those who respected the land. This part of the canyon is special, Naeli said. It holds both sorrow and hope. It shows what has been lost, but also what has endured.
It is a place of learning if you are willing to listen.
Break. Thomas followed closely, his senses alert. He could feel the weight of history pressing gently on him. He had walked through much of the canyon already, but here the presence of the past seemed more tangible, almost as if the canyon were watching, judging, and guiding all at once. He understood that he was a witness now, and that witnessing was both a responsibility and an honor. As they moved carefully along a narrow path, Naeli pointed out a small opening in the rocks. "Look carefully," she said. First.
This is where the final truth lies. Thomas peered through the opening. Below, the canyon floor spread out, revealing a scene that was both sobering and awe-inspiring.
The land bore traces of human disturbance, yes, but it also showed remarkable resilience. Rocks had shifted, plants had grown in unexpected patterns, and water had carved new pathways through the canyon. Nature had endured, and in many ways, the land had healed itself. Naeli knelt beside Thomas. Breaths.
Do you see? She asked. The canyon shows both what has been harmed and what has survived.
It teaches that every action has consequences, but also that time and care can restore balance. Thomas absorbed her words. He realized that the canyon was a mirror of life itself. Sometimes painful, sometimes fragile, but always capable of resilience. About the events of the past, the mistakes and disruptions had left marks, but the canyon had also adapted, endured, and continued to hold its stories. He felt both humility and hope. They descended slowly to the canyon floor, moving carefully over the uneven rocks. Thomas noticed more signs of history. Small piles of stones, worn paths, and delicate plants growing in unexpected places. Naeli explained that these were symbols of endurance, traces of care, and reminders that life continued even in places that had been disturbed. Thomas felt a deep sense of respect for the balance the canyon maintained, and for the guardians, like Naeli, who had worked to protect it. As they walked, Naeli shared more of her story. Grasp. She spoke of her ancestors, who had faced similar challenges with outsiders, and how they had preserved knowledge and respect for the land despite difficulties. She explained that the canyon was not just a place of the past, it was alive in the present, and it would continue to teach those who listened. Great. Thomas felt a profound connection to her words, realizing that he was learning not just about the canyon but about life, responsibility, and respect for all living things. Eventually they reached a small clearing where the canyon opened up. Here, the sun shone fully, illuminating the rocks and plants in warm light. The place was quiet, yet alive with energy. Thomas could feel the presence of the past, the whispers of those who had lived, worked, and protected the land. Naeli motioned for him to look around, to take in everything. "This is the heart of the canyon," she said. "Here, the past and present meet. It is where lessons are learned, where respect is shown, and where the land reminds us of our responsibilities." You must remember this place, not just with your eyes, but with your heart.
Thomas took a deep breath and looked around. He saw not only the traces of disruption, but also signs of care and endurance.
The canyon had survived, not because it was untouched, but because it had been respected, protected, and observed with understanding. He felt a sense of peace and connection, realizing that the canyon had taught him something more than he could have imagined: the importance of seeing clearly, respecting history, and taking responsibility for one's actions. Naeli watched him carefully.
You have learned much in these days, she said.
But understanding is only the beginning. The canyon has given you knowledge, but it is your choice how you carry it forward. You may leave this place, but its lessons will remain with you if you respect them. Thomas nodded, feeling the truth of her words.
He had come to the canyon out of curiosity and a desire to understand, but he was leaving with much more: humility, wisdom, and a deep appreciation for the power of the land. He knew that he could never treat it lightly again.
As the sun began to lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the canyon floor, Thomas and Naeli prepared to leave. The journey back would be careful, as the canyon demanded attention and respect at every step.
Yet, Thomas felt confident not because he had mastered the land, but because he understood it better. He had witnessed its history, learned its lessons, and accepted the responsibility that came with that knowledge.
Walking back along the narrow paths, Thomas reflected on everything he had seen. The canyon had shown him sorrow and loss, resilience and hope, danger and beauty. He realized that life, like the canyon, was full of challenges and lessons, and that understanding came from paying attention, listening, and moving with respect. By the time they reached the edge of the canyon, the sun was dipping behind the cliffs, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange, pink, and purple. Thomas turned to Naeli, feeling a deep gratitude.
"Thank you," he said. "I can't say enough how much I've learned."
This place, it's changed me. Hey!
Naeli smiled, a quiet expression of satisfaction and relief.
"The canyon has given you its truth," she said, grasping it. "Remember it. Carry it with you. And when you leave, respect it always." Thomas nodded, understanding the depth of her words. He felt a sense of closure, not only with the canyon, but with the journey he had taken alongside Naeli. He realized that this experience would stay with him forever, guiding him in ways he could not yet fully imagine. As they parted ways, Thomas felt a mixture of sadness and hope. He knew he would not see Naeli again soon, but he carried her lessons and the canyon's wisdom with him. The land had tested him, revealed its story, and allowed him to witness its resilience. He felt honored to have been a part of it. Walking away from the canyon, Thomas looked back one last time. The shadows had lengthened, the rocks glowed in the fading sunlight, and the canyon seemed to breathe quietly, holding its secrets safely for those who would respect them. He felt a sense of awe and responsibility, knowing that he had witnessed something rare and precious. That night, back at his ranch, Thomas sat quietly outside, thinking of the canyon. The desert stretched around him, familiar yet changed in his eyes. He realized that he had learned to see the land differently, not just as a place to work, but as a living record of history, a teacher, and a guardian of stories. The lessons he had learned would guide him in all his decisions. His respect for the land deepened, and his understanding of history, culture, and responsibility forever altered. Thomas smiled softly to himself, feeling peace in his heart. The canyon had shown him its truth, and he had received it with care, respect, and courage. Though he could not undo the mistakes of the past, he could honor the lessons of the land and carry them forward. He had been tested, he had witnessed, and he had learned. And somewhere in the vast desert, the canyon waited patiently, its story secure, its lessons preserved, ready to teach those who were willing to listen, observe, and respect the land with humility and understanding.